Poverty is not a natural state. While inequality may arise in any complex society, the persistence of deep, generational poverty, especially in the modern world of abundance, raises uncomfortable questions. One such question is whether the powerful, knowingly or unknowingly, benefit from and even require the continued existence of poverty. Is the suffering of the poor merely collateral damage in a flawed system, or is it an indispensable pillar holding up the comfort of the elite? This essay examines the philosophical foundations and historical manifestations of elite control, drawing on political theory, ethics, and economic philosophy. We will argue that the concentration of power and wealth necessitates a subordinate class, and that poverty, rather than being a failing of the system, is one of its central features. 1. Power and its dependence on hierarchy. At its root, power is relational. To be powerful is not merely to possess resources or knowledge, but to hold a position relative to others who lack what one has. In this light, power does not exist in a vacuum, it requires the powerless to exist. Philosopher Michel Foucault reframed power not as a fixed possession but as a network of relations, always exerted upon others. From this perspective, the existence of a disempowered class is not an accident, it is a structural necessity. Aristotle observed that society tends to reproduce hierarchies because stability demands order. The powerful maintain this order by ensuring that social mobility is limited. If everyone could rise to power, the elite's status would be diluted. Thus, a permanent underclass becomes useful, even essential. This brings us to a haunting implication: poverty is not a problem to be solved, but a mechanism to be managed, a valuable byproduct of a system designed to perpetuate inequality. 2. The role of scarcity in social control. The ideology of scarcity has long been used to justify economic systems that benefit the few. Capitalism, particularly in its neoliberal incarnation, is often portrayed as the most efficient allocator of scarce resources. However, this narrative falls apart under scrutiny. We live in an age of abundance of food, information, and production capability, yet poverty persists. Why? French sociologist Pierre Bourdieu posited that symbolic power, such as the control over cultural narratives and norms, is just as crucial as economic power. The myth of scarcity serves a dual purpose: it justifies the wealth of the few and legitimizes the suffering of the many. If resources are scarce, then inequality is natural; if inequality is natural, then poverty becomes a moral failing rather than a systemic issue. Scarcity, whether real or manufactured, creates competition among the lower classes, diverting attention away from the structures that produce inequality. It is a strategy of divide and rule, as effective today as it was in ancient Rome. 3. Labor, exploitation, and the need for the poor. From Karl Marx to David Graeber, many thinkers have argued that capitalism fundamentally relies on the exploitation of labor. Marx described the proletariat as the class that produces wealth but owns none of it. The elite, or bourgeoisie, maintain their dominance by extracting surplus value from workers, paying them less than the value they create. For this system to persist, a desperate labor force is required. If all individuals had access to education, healthcare, and a basic standard of living, many would choose not to participate in demeaning or dangerous labor. The threat of poverty, therefore, is a coercive tool, one that ensures compliance and submission. Universal welfare, living wages, and wealth redistribution are often resisted not because they are unworkable, but because they reduce the elite's control over the labor force. A well-fed, well-educated population is harder to manipulate. Poverty, then, becomes a silent overseer, ensuring that the machinery of capitalism runs smoothly. 4. Manufactured consent and media as a tool of elite power. Noam Chomsky's concept of manufactured consent highlights how the media serves elite interests by shaping public opinion. The press does not simply reflect reality, it constructs it. Narratives about poverty often focus on individual responsibility, criminality, or laziness, rather than structural inequity. This is no accident. By controlling the discourse around poverty, the powerful obscure its roots. The wealthy rarely appear in news stories about economic injustice, unless they are portrayed as philanthropists or innovators. This invisibility is part of a broader effort to naturalize inequality. A compliant media landscape distracts from systemic critiques and instead promotes stories of exceptional individuals who escape poverty, reinforcing the idea that anyone can succeed if they work hard enough. Such narratives shift blame onto people with low incomes themselves, ensuring that widespread dissatisfaction never matures into revolution. 5. Education and the cultivation of obedience. Education should be a great equalizer, but in many societies, it functions as a gatekeeping mechanism. Elite schools not only impart knowledge but also instill the social codes, networks, and confidence necessary to access power. Meanwhile, public education, especially in impoverished areas, often prioritizes discipline over critical thinking. This divergence is not merely about funding, it reflects deeper philosophical choices about what different classes are being prepared for. People with low incomes are educated to obey, the elite are educated to lead. Paulo Freire, in Pedagogy of the Oppressed, emphasized how education can be used to either domesticate or liberate. Most modern systems choose the former. Keeping people with low incomes poorly educated limits their ability to question authority, understand their rights, or imagine alternatives. It creates a docile population, trained to accept precarity as natural and rebellion as futile. 6. Debt and the illusion of freedom. One of the most effective tools of modern control is debt. Unlike slavery or feudal serfdom, debt gives the illusion of choice. People borrow to buy homes, cars, and education, believing they are investing in their future. In reality, they are shackled by obligations that limit their autonomy. Maurizio Lazzarato, in The Making of the Indebted Man, explains how debt transforms individuals into moral subjects. If you fail, it's because you didn't work hard enough to repay what you owe. This moral framing erases systemic critiques and transforms economic failure into personal shame. Debt ensures that even those who temporarily escape poverty remain vulnerable to it. It maintains a compliant workforce less likely to strike, organize, or rebel. In this way, debt becomes a modern leash more subtle than chains, but just as binding. 7. Resistance, solidarity, and the threat to elite stability. The powerful fear of solidarity among the poor is, above all, the driving force. History shows that when oppressed people unite across racial, ethnic, or national lines, they can challenge even the most entrenched power structures. This is why so much energy is devoted to sowing division. Identity politics, while important, is often co-opted by elite forces to distract from economic solidarity. The goal is to divide people with low incomes into competing tribes, each vying for scraps, rather than uniting to demand systemic change. Movements like Occupy Wall Street, the Arab Spring, and recent labor strikes demonstrate the potential of mass mobilization. Yet such movements are quickly demonized, infiltrated, or suppressed. The elite do not fear protests, they fear movements that build lasting alternatives. 8. Ethical considerations, is this evil or just inevitable? Not all members of the elite are cartoon villains. Many genuinely believe they are doing good, creating jobs, or advancing progress. This complicates the moral picture. Can we blame individuals for participating in systems they did not create? Hannah Arendt's concept of the banality of evil is relevant here. Evil is often not the result of monstrous intent, but of ordinary people participating in harmful systems without question. The machinery of inequality runs on indifference as much as malice. But recognizing this should not lead to resignation. Philosophers like Iris Marion Young argue for a social connection model of responsibility, where all participants in structural injustice share the burden of change. The powerful, having benefited the most, bear the most significant responsibility for dismantling unjust systems. Imagining a different future. The poor are not poor by accident, and the rich are not rich by virtue alone. The structures that uphold wealth and power require the continued existence of poverty. To maintain their dominance, elites cultivate dependency, suppress dissent, and manipulate narratives. But this is not destiny. Philosophical inquiry reminds us that what has been constructed by human hands can be deconstructed by human will. Real change begins not just with policy, but with consciousness, with the refusal to accept inequality as natural or necessary. We must resist the seductive lie that poverty is a reflection of individual failure. Instead, we should see it as a mirror reflecting the moral failings of our systems. Only by standing together, questioning everything, and demanding more can we begin to dismantle the architecture of elite control.